Sometimes, simpler can be better. That certainly is true for many things in life, and keyboards are no exception. Today, we're looking at the M7, a 65% from MonsGeek that is wired only, and it has QMK firmware, and the bare bones price is a very reasonable $80. Let's see if simpler really is better. Before we dive in, I want to mention that MonsGeek sent me the M7 in exchange for an honest review. MonsGeek does not have any input on my review here, and I was not paid to make this video. I do have an affiliate link for you in the description if you're interested in picking up the M7 and you'd like to support this channel. I love a modified 65% layout. There are plenty of traditional 65% options on the market, but sometimes with traditional layouts that don't offer any spacing, I do feel a little bit squished at times, and that's why I appreciate a good modified layout. The layout of the M7 here gives you that little bit of space for your arrow keys, and you also get kind of a mini nav cluster. Is it perfect? Well, we'll get into that in a moment. But first, as always, let's talk about the features and specs, and we'll do a sound test, maybe 2 sound tests. Oh, and by the way, the M7 does not currently come fully assembled. The M7W, the wireless version, does have a fully assembled option, but the M7 is available as a bare bones option. So MonsGeek sent me some keycaps and switches. They sent me ACO Piano Pro switches and a set of some newer ACO keycaps. You'll see those in the sound test, and we'll also talk about them in the pros and cons. The MonsGeek M7 is a bare-bones 65% keyboard with 68 keys and an ANSI layout. The connectivity is USB-C wired only, however MonsGeek does offer the M7W as a separate model which adds wireless connectivity. Construction is all aluminum with side accents in silver for the black color option or gold for the silver and purple case colors. The dimensions are 345 by 121 by 32.6 millimeters, and the weight is 1,600 grams or 3.5 pounds without keycaps and switches. Internals include a polycarbonate plate with silicone gasket mounts and a hot swappable PCB compatible with 3 and 5-pin switches. Several foams are provided, including pour-on foam in the case bottom and between the PCB and plate, as well as an IXPE switch pad and a PET layer in the case bottom. The M7 comes with plate-mounted stabilizers pre-installed, but there are also PCB mount stabilizers included, which you can install if desired. MonsGeek also includes an optional pre-cut tape mod and Teflon force brake pads. Backlighting is south-facing RGB with 20 modes pre-programmed. The M7 firmware is QMK and is VIA compatible for customization on Windows, Mac, and Linux. The M7 is available from MonsGeek's website for $79, which does not include switches and keycaps. All right, let's get into the pros and cons for the M7, starting with the pros. First, the construction here is very nice for the price. The quality of the aluminum of the case is a bit better than the price would suggest. It is nice quality aluminum. The machining on it is very nice. The rounded corners are smooth. Overall, it's nice and smooth. It's also pretty heavy for the size, so it feels very solid on your desk. It just doesn't feel like a keyboard that would only cost $80 for the bare bones option. Now, getting back to the layout, I'm actually really happy with it, so I'm counting it as a pro. I know this is subjective, but as I mentioned earlier, I love a modified 65% layout because I think it's a great balance between usefulness and comfort while still being very compact and not taking up a huge amount of your desk. And I found myself really liking this mini nav cluster rather than having the nav keys as a column on the right side like you normally see with a 65%. I appreciate the little bit of spacing around the arrow keys because we still now get that full-sized right shift key. So again, that's all up to personal preference, but I found myself really liking this style of 65% layout. Also, love the QMK firmware and that Monsgeek has layers pre-set up here for Mac and Windows. Function and O is your toggle for switching between Mac and Windows layouts, and it's the same command, just swap back and forth. Way simpler than having to remove a keycap and get to a tiny little physical switch, which is what you have to do with the wireless models, including the M7W, unfortunately. The wired only option here, super easy, just one key command, and you can swap back and forth all day. By the way, if you're looking for the base key map file here to use in VIA, I will link to where that is on Monsgeek's site down in the description. Another pro here is that Monsgeek gives you some fun extras to customize your M7 included in the base price. It comes with plate mount stabilizers installed already, but they include a set of PCB mount stabilizers, and they include a pre-cut tape mod as well as some forced break strips, so you can do those modifications if you want to. You don't have to, but they're already there in the box, which is great. There's also plenty of case foams to play around with and get the sound that you want. More on sound in just a moment. Now, speaking of the stabilizers, the plate-mounted ones that come pre-installed, they're fine. They're not bad, but I prefer PCB-mounted stabilizers because they tend to have less rattle and they just feel a little bit more stable and solid to me, and that is the case here. The PCB-mounted stabilizers they provide in the box seem pretty good quality. I don't know they're quite up to my favorite standard, which is Durock V2s currently, but they are pretty nice. I'm not really tempted to swap them out. I'm happy with them. Now the case bottom here is the same bottom as the M7W, the wireless model, and so there's a cutout for the battery, but I like what they did here because they put a silicone block taking up that space so that big open gap does not become a resonance problem. All right, before we move on to cons, I've got a few things that I want to talk about in between pros and cons, either because they're very subjective and they'll vary from person to person, or because they're not really a pro or a con. The first thing here is the overall design. Aside from the accent bars that are on the side, this is a very understated, I think, elegant design. Now, whether you like the silver and gold inserts that go in the sides, that's a subjective thing. One of the reasons why I ended up going with these keycaps when I swapped out the ones they sent me was because I thought it actually added to that overall elegant, understated look. They do have other case color options, but the design in general, I would call, maybe not minimalist because it does have accents on the side, but fairly understated. As far as the sound profile and the feel, I'm not really gonna say whether it's a pro or a con, because this is where we get really subjective. The actual feel and sound is gonna vary widely depending on the switches and the keycaps that you complete it with, because remember, it is bare bones and you have to buy keycaps and switches. But I will talk about a couple things in this kind of neutral space between pros and cons. One of the things here is with regard to the sound profile. I think this case in general and the components, it leans in a clacky direction. Now, I'm sure if you went with some super thocky switches and maybe taller, dense keycaps, it would certainly deepen the sound here. But I'm just saying that without putting in that effort, the profile, it leans into the clackier territory. And that's not objectively good or bad. It just depends on what your preference is. So speaking of the keycaps and switches, let's talk about the ones that Monsgeek sent me. They sent me ACO Piano Pro switches, which I have actually tried before because they were also in the M1W that I reviewed. I actually feel that maybe I got an off batch this time or something because they were not the way that I remember them being with the M1W. I found this batch to be quite scratchy feeling, and lots of them had pretty loud spring ping. Now, I could have hand lubed them to probably fix both of those issues, but I just decided to swap them out since this comes as bare bones anyway. What I ended up swapping them for is a set of EpoMaker Wisteria linear switches, which are factory lubed, they're medium weight, and they have a palm stem, a PC upper, and a PA66 bottom. I'm having no issues with those. They are smoother than this batch of Piano Pros, and there's no spring ping at all in this batch. As for the keycaps, Monsgeek sent me double shot PBT SA Profile in the London colorway set from ACO. Now, these are entirely up to your personal taste in terms of the SA Profile height and the color theme of the London set, but overall, they are nice quality. The double shot quality looks good to me, and the only downside for me, honestly, is the case that they come in. It's actually a nice hard protective case on the outside, but on the inside, the keycaps are pressed onto little standoffs to hold them in place instead of being in like a tray. And I actually had to use a keycap puller to get them out because some of them were really stuck on there. But otherwise, if you like the SA Profile and the colors, it is a pretty nice set. Now I swapped them for a Cherry Profile set from Novel Keys, and it's a pretty basic set. It's the Charcoal PBT Cherry set, which is just black with gray dye sub legends. They feel a little bit on the lighter side to me. They don't feel particularly heavyweight and dense, so I thought they would accentuate the clackier sound profile, which they seem to. I also think that they look great with the M7's black case and silver accent. All right, now let's talk about a couple of cons or maybe some things that could still be improved for the M7. Now the funny thing is, I actually had more things that would be cons about the switches and keycaps that Monsgeek sent me, but they're not cons for the M7 in general since they don't come with the M7. We're actually going to be left mostly with subjective cons here and a couple of nitpicky things, so they may not matter to everybody. But first up, when it comes to the color options, Monsgeek introduced a new silver accent here on the sides, and that comes with the black case, but the silver and the purple case colors still come with the gold side accent. So if you're not a fan of gold, but you don't want the black case, then you're kind of out of luck. Again, this is kind of nitpicky and subjective and won't matter to everyone, just something that I thought of because now they're not all gold. They do have silver, it's just only available on the black. Another con that not everyone will care about is the flexibility of the gasket mount here. There isn't much. Even with the case bottom foam removed to give it more space to move up and down, it's not very flexible feeling and definitely not bouncy. Now, it doesn't feel like super hard like a top mount or something like that, but if you're looking for a really flexible feel or a lot of that up and down movement while you type, you won't get it here even when you give it room to move. But conversely, if you don't like a lot of flex and prefer something more firm, you might be perfectly happy with this. Now for one really nitpicky thing here. Monsgeek includes a lot of modification options, and I really appreciate including the PCB mount stabilizers because I definitely prefer them. However, to really make sure you're doing everything you can to prevent rattle, they missed including a couple of things with those stabilizers. For example, if you buy a set of PCB mount stabilizers like my favorite Durock V2s, they include little pads that you stick on the PCB and little washers for the screws that go on the other side. These two things are extra insurance for preventing rattle getting transferred to the PCB, and Monsgeek doesn't include those. They do give you little force brake pads, which you could actually use if you're not going to use them as force brakes and you want to punch a couple holes in them, but it would be great if they actually just gave you those extra little bits. Now beyond that, we're down to just considering whether 65% meets your needs here. Monsgeek does have other layouts in the M line if you need the function row or if you need a number pad, they've got layouts that would suit your needs. And in case you're wondering here, I'm not going to say that the lack of wireless is a con because they offer a wireless model, so don't buy the M7 wired model if you want wireless. I mean, that's really it as far as I'm concerned. All of those cons are either subjective or pretty nitpicky because the M7 is a nice 65% keyboard at a very fair price for what you get in terms of quality. Now, of course, the final cost is going to be higher than $80 because you have to buy switches and keycaps, and it's going to vary widely depending on what you buy. You could go with GMK keycaps that cost more than the keyboard, or $20 Amazon keycaps. Nothing wrong with either one, by the way, just saying there is a wide range. The quality of the aluminum case here and the QMK firmware and the comfortable layout make it a very nice option if you like what Monsgeek has done with this layout and the color options. So ultimately, I do recommend the M7 if you're in the market for something a bit more compact with an aluminum build and you don't need wireless connectivity. If you're looking to simplify things a little bit, M7 is a good choice. So that'll do it for this video. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think of the M7? What do you think of this layout style? And if you bought one for yourself, let me know how you're liking it. Don't forget to subscribe to the Semi-Pro Tech and Gear channel. And while you're here, why don't you check out this video? I'm sure you'll like it. Thanks everybody. See you next time.